do you think is going to happen?
Okay. I will start, and let's see. I saw Lenny join. Did he leave again?
No, he's there.
Oh,
Just
there he
on
is.
his face.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. I must be in multiple screens. So we are going to go back over chapter 1. And I want to clarify for you, in doing that, I want to we'll clarify together and some of the main concepts of this chapter. And also I want to be able to take questions. And what I want to say, I mentioned this in the Facebook group that some of you are part of. And what I want to just name is that it's interesting because there's an irony, I don't know, irony, but is the right word. But, we're studying the Baal Shem Tov because I want to give you access to meaningful, to beautiful, meaningful interpretations and perspectives on Torah and prayer that will change your relationship, that can change your relationship to tefillah and to Torah. But and that's A, and it's also the case that the Baal Shem Tov, that was precisely what the Baal Shem Tov was trying to do. The Baal Shem Tov was trying to make Torah and prayer accessible is not quite the right word, but he was trying to open the gates to the deepest levels of, or the highest levels of prayer and Torah. And yet, the first part of Amud HaTefillah has some really, really difficult abstract concepts. And so, we need to push through those to kind of get to where we're trying to be, because I don't want this to be a class that will feel like when we studied Sha'arei Ora, gates of light, because that text was always going to be highly conceptual and extremely intellectual. And, I hope over time you'll be able to draw, illumination and joy from that. But that's a tough book. And it was always going to be. The Baal Shem Tov really wants to bring us to a place where we're not beating our head against the wall intellectually to try to understand things. And that was part and parcel to his mission. It just so happens that this first chapter deals with a lot of conceptual stuff that can be pretty tricky. Okay, so with that as a preface, let's jump in and go back over some of the stuff that we talked about. Give me a second here. So now we're back in this book. Some of you have it, some of you don't. We talked last time very briefly about his letter to his brother-in-law. We're not going to spend time on that today. But I do want to spend some time talking about the very first teaching in there. And as we did last time, and just try to delve into the depths a little bit. So I'm on page 4 of Pillar of Prayer, page 4 of Pillar of Prayer. And hold on, now I got to do this tricky thing where I look at my own notes and I keep you on my screen on this tiny little laptop screen.
Can I just ask a quick housekeeping question?
Yes,
Have you decided?
Hold on, I can barely hear you. Can you speak a little louder?
Really? Can you, have we decided on whether you're going to just do this as it comes up week by week and get as far as you're going to get, or have you decided to, set a certain amount of time, 2 weeks, 1 or 2 classes per chapter? Because that came up, and I don't think we resolved that.
Yeah, I was going to address it at the end of the class, but we might as well address it now. But no, let's do it now. I'm muting everybody because I'm getting an echo. So, my plan is for right now to spend about a week on each chapter. Each session will be 1 chapter. But I don't think we're going to read the entire book because there's some chapters that, there's a little bit of repetitiveness, or there's concepts that I just sort of want to push past, and because I want you to, I wanted us to open by getting a deep dive on his thoughts about tefillah, but I also want to get to other aspects of his approach and his thinking and his takes on the Torah. So for right now, the answer is one session per chapter, and then as we go forward, we'll leap around and skip around a little bit. Okay, so that was one thought. Then the other thought I had that's related was, depending on how much time is required to get through the chapter concepts, so everybody feels like they really have access to them. If there's time left over today and in future sessions, I thought we would look at some other Baal Shem Tov texts on the Torah itself, on the parashah. It turns out that on this week's parashah, I didn't love some of the teachings, and they weren't radiant to me, but if we have time, I'll share some of them, okay? So does that answer your question? Great, okay. The last housekeeping thing is, please join the Facebook group. Several of you have, many of you have not. And, that will be a place where it'll just, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do explanations there of some of the material we're reading, and I'm trying to make it accessible as I can. So it's just a really good place to have clarification of the concepts. And also, I hope eventually it'll be used as a dialogue, a forum. Right now, the folks who are on there are not using it as a forum to either ask me questions or to converse with one another, but I'm just bringing that to your attention. Cliff asked the address of the Facebook group. Well, I sent an email invitation to everybody in the class, so it may have gone to your junk mail, Cliff, but if you're not on Facebook, then you wouldn't be able to access it. Oh, okay. I think you have to have a Facebook account first. And then once you do, I think you can find it within groups. It's just called Gates of Light, Baal Shem Tov or something, or just send me an email once you have an account and I will send you an invitation. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about so now we're, what did I say, page 4? Yeah, so one of the things that is so tantalizing and so challenging about the Baal Shem Tov and his approach to prayer is the ways in which he, his philosophy of language, if you want, I'm not really sure that's the best phrase to use, but he has the sense that the words as they appear on the page and their corresponding meanings are really just the front door. And if you stand there just reading the words themselves, like, so for example, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, Yotzer Or V'Rechoshech, who fashions light and creates darkness. Okay, that's from the morning prayers. So if you, according to the Baal Shem Tov, it seems to me that if you just look at those words, and and then if you go to the next level, you're not just reading them, but you're like really concentrating on what does blessed mean? How is God blessed? And what does light mean? And is light literal or is it spiritual, right? That would be a high level. If you never broke from that level of concentration, it seems to me that the Baal Shem Tov is saying that if you just do that at that very high level, you're still just staring at the front door. You have not opened the door. Because it seems that what he's saying is you can get to a level, you need to get to a level where the individual words and even the letters are, dissolving, and you're accessing God or godliness. This word Elohut, which is, I think, maybe translated in here as divinity. We'll talk about it in a moment. In a kind of direct experiential way that goes beyond the language. And so now let's dig a little deeper. That's kind of the intro concept. Okay. So we talked about last time worlds, souls, and Elohut. Do they translate that as divinity? Or they translate it as divine realm? I guess Callis does. Yeah. So Again, it's such a tricky concept that I'm going to belabor a little bit. The words themselves, right? Those are these discrete, like the word Baruch, blessed. Okay, so that there's that realm, the meaning of the word. Then there's, and that's what he calls the realm of the worlds, olamot, worlds. Then there's the realm of the neshamot, of the souls. And I for those of you who read were in the Facebook group, you saw that I already took a crack at explaining why this concept matters and why it's so powerful. Okay, so there's the concept of worlds, and worlds is he means words. Okay, Baruch, the word Baruch, blessed. That's an example, or one little piece of something that's from the worlds, that is created things. But it is made up of neshamot. Within it are souls. Neshamot means souls. So the souls, if we're going to really take him at his word, kind of be slavishly literal to what he's saying, Baruch is made up of these souls. Bet, Resh, Vav, and final Chaf. The word Baruch. If you don't know Hebrew, it's fine. I'm just spelling the letters. So and then there's a third realm, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what I want to dwell on is he's making an analogy between words on the page and things in the world. So a word in prayer is analogous. And I to be honest, I'm not even sure the word analogous is the right word, because there's a more profound connection. So I'm calling it analogous because I don't have another word for it. But you can think of a discrete word in a prayer book in the same way that you think about your computer screen. Or let's take a more natural, beautiful image of the tree that's outside your window. Anybody have a tree outside your window? Great, awesome. Whatever it is, doesn't have to be a tree, any object. Okay, so the encountering a word is like encountering a thing. That thing means something to you, that tree. I see this, I'm at the coast right now, I'm at the Washington coast, and I see this beautiful kind of wind-blown tree, the way that the trees on the coast kind of get that like permanent wind-blown look. And, what does it mean to me? I don't know, I have a relationship to this tree, because it's beautiful and it reminds me of nature and getting outside of my head and getting outside of my computer and growth and renewal, right? It symbolizes these things to me. It signifies these things to me. But that tree is sort of the surface level of God's relationship to the created world, right? God made that tree, it's true. But right now, I'm relating to that tree like the tree is the tree and I am me. But if I look into the soul of the tree, and I'm putting it in quotes because when we think of a soul, we think of the human, we think of human beings as having souls. It's a little bit of another conversation, but if I try to reach beyond the tree itself as a physical object, and I try to get to its essence. So now let's call the world of neshamot, of souls. I'm calling it essence now for a moment. I begin to be curious about what is it composed of, right? And I find out that, let's just go down the physical realm. I start to pick apart the tree and see it's composed of green pine needles and of flexible brown bark, and I can describe its physical characteristics, and we'll go to a level deeper and we get to the molecular level and then the atomic level. And at some level, I say, holy moly, that tree is made of the same stuff that I'm made of. Right now we're at the atomic level, and there's not a really meaningful difference between the tree and me. We're just in this realm where we're all being created. Now, if we shift from and then I'll pause because I want to take questions. If we shift for a moment from the physical analogy I just gave, or the physical approach that I just gave, diving down to the molecular level, on some spiritual level, the tree and I are also the same, right? We're both just products of the creation that God made. And in that sense, like, sure, he happens to be a tree and he looks like that. You happen to look like you look, and I happen to look like I look. But on a very deep level, neither one of us, neither the tree nor me, gave birth to myself. Neither one of us conceived of ourselves. Neither one of us understands the ultimate meaning of reality. And on a deep level, what we really are is we are things that are connected to something bigger than us. So the tree and I are spiritually part of a bigger cosmic reality, right? We're connected in some way spiritually. So just like the letter bet, so now let me zoom out and then I'll pause, I promise. Just like the letter bet is the beginning of the word Baruch, which means blessed. Well, there's tons of letter bets all over the Torah. The letter bet is the soul of the word Baruch, but it's also the soul of, I don't know, somebody give me another bet word. Bereshit, in the beginning, right? The first word of the Torah. Or Binah, understanding, or any number. And the word Lev, meaning heart, the second letter of the word Lev is a bet, right? So these components of every word are he's likening them, again, I want to be careful because that it already creates too much distance. He's saying they are the souls of the word. They are the components that make up each word, but are also components of every other word, right? And so just as we read a prayer and we see a discrete word and he's encouraging us, don't get too caught up in the discrete meaning of that one word, but see that they're all connected because all of the letters are the same letters moving in different combinations and forms. I think that what he's gesturing at, or maybe what he's encapsulating a broader Kabbalistic concept, is in the same way the entire physical world looks like discrete objects: tree, post, house, baby, but actually it's all composed of the same material that just happens to be taking a particular form. So let me pause there because we need to go deeper than that, but let me pause and see if there are questions or comments about that. Everyone gets it? Okay, Ann Prahl, you're muted. You're still muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
You're leading us to this concept of unity. Everything is one. We're all, spiritually, physically, whatever. We are all the same stuff and we're all one. Are you suggesting that, is the best suggesting that when we look at the word in the prayer, that we're, rather than think about what the word Baruch means, we're supposed to just be seeing that Baruch is made up of stuff, just like we're made up of stuff, and we are the same as that word?
So, great question.
And that's what the point is.
Great question. By the way, I may not have a great, so you kind of faded out as you were talking, and I think it might be on my end. So let me know if I'm coming through in a kind of broken up way, and then I'll switch to using my phone as a hotspot. The Wi-Fi here is not super great. I would say yes, but, or yes, and, because yes, you, on some level, you're composed of the same material that the same spiritual soul that the word Baruch is made out of. But it's not just the words on the page, it's everything around you, right? So because you're also made up of the same material as whatever you're knitting right now, and the computer and me and everything. So ultimately, yes, he's trying to point to how single discrete things are like ineluctably bound to the oneness of everything else. Okay, now one of the, well, sorry, before I want to go to the next level, but let's hang out here for a second. Michael, did you have a hand up? And Sarah Sturtz, maybe? No. Okay, Sarah? No? Okay, I'm listening to you. Okay, so so then at the net, I guess then what I want to say is that that what's so profound about that is that if it is the case that the word, and every time I talk about a word, you're like, your brain has to, what I want to ask your brain to do is to realize that I'm not just talking about words, I'm also talking about any physical thing in the world, right? Because he's making that connection. But if the word Baruch is made up of these souls that are also part of everything else, okay? Like they're part of every other word in the Torah, and then by connection, like I'm part of everything else in the world, then it leads to this point that the Baal Shem Tov will come back to again and again, which is a very profound and a very important tool for Jewish meditation and for cleaving to God, for trying to walk the path to cleave to God, which is that this idea of the microcosm contains everything, right? That any little piece of God's universe in some way contains or can lead to everything, right? If I can dissolve the word Baruch into the entire Torah, because like every letter is part of this larger piece, or if I can dissolve this tree into the deepest level of connection where I share something with it, then anything, you can even like staring at my cell phone or contemplating your voice or whatever, or the tiniest bug. Like when I was with my son Rafi a few weeks ago, we went to the beach and we saw this gorgeous little snail. We were at what's that park that overlooks Cannon Beach, that national or that state park. We saw this tons of little snails, gorgeous, like this big. That snail, in some way, is connected to everything and connected to me. And at some point of my contemplation, the division between snail and Josh, or even snail and my son Rafi, like I begin to be able to see that it's all connected and it's all made of a single unity that is God. And
Is that Ecola State Park? Ecola?
Exactly right. Ecola State Park, exactly. So if you learn nothing else today, you've learned that Ecola State Park is and so the reason, so on the one hand, you can say, oh, that's a really interesting philosophical concept, right? There's that within every tiny piece, there is everything. Okay, that's great, neat. Let's go to the next concept. The reason that matters is because it means that there, everywhere you look or everything you feel, everything you hear, everything around you is an access point to cleaving to the one that made all things, and to cleaving to the unity, allowing yourself to dissolve into the unity. If you meditate on that thing, I guess would have to be the mechanism, right? It's not gonna, you can't just walk by a snail and think about it and then you're cleaving to God. But we can meditate on any one thing. We don't have to, and here's where the rubber really hits the road. I don't have to study the deepest Zoharic or Kabbalistic concepts in order to cleave to God. I don't have to study Talmud, all day and all night until my mind is finally able to clear itself of obstructions and I see divine light clearly. Everything contains everything, or anything contains everything. So let me pause there. Does that make sense? At least conceptually, right? Harder to access on the past the level of the rational, although that's also what I want to talk about next. Anne?
Well, historically, that was the part that mainstream Judaism reacted against, right? That there was some way to access this fabulousness and oneness with God without studying like
Right.
a full time all the time.
Yeah, and yes, I think that's, I would say it like this. I think that's one of the, from within the Jewish perspective, within the classical Jewish perspective, I would say that's one of the dangers of Chassidut, right? in the sense that, because the Baal Shem Tov would want to make it very clear that this does not mean that you're free to stop studying Torah. He would want it very clear that we should all be studying Mishnah and Gemara, and we should know the prayer book inside and out, and that we should all do mitzvot. Like he would want that made very clear. But yes, a few generations removed, you no longer have the foundation of Jewish praxis and the philosophy of mitzvah and the theology that connects people to mitzvah, or they don't believe it in the same way, but you still have this core idea leading many people to conclude, yeah, we don't need that stuff. We can just meditate. I don't have a great answer. Like I'm not sure I have a great answer for modern people as to why that's not the case. But for sure, the Baal Shem Tov would have said, no. Everything else still stands, and you got to focus as a Jew and know know all of these gateways that the tradition provides you. Cheryl and then Brad.
There's a section in our book that looks like begins on page 7 that I think addresses this a little bit.
Right.
It talks about the two levels of Torah study.
Yeah.
And like without pure motive and with pure motive.
Right.
And you think without pure motive would be bad, but he says you have to do that. And that's kind of like the more traditional study, it looks like to me. That you don't have a pure motive, you're trying to struggle your way through the words.
Right.
And
yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Because I do want to spend time on that. That is on page 7, and you're right. Maybe that would be his answer. Would be that, listen, you can't just dissolve into the snail and see the unity of God. You must have the framework that enables you to do that, and the framework is the Jewish tradition. I'm going to come back to that because I think that teaching is so amazing and beautiful and easy to misunderstand. So we're going to come back to that. Brad?
Yeah, thanks. This seems to open up a door for me, and actually it's something that has been kind of bothering me in a way. And what I think you're doing here is introducing the idea that you don't have to be an intellectual giant to approach God, that you don't have to be brilliant in your studies, and that someone, say, with high-level Down syndrome can be close to God without gaining a deep understanding brain-wise.
Right.
Is that within what you're saying?
Well, first of all, yeah, it's a question of whether it's within what the Baal Shem Tov is saying, right? None of this is my teaching, but
well, no.
Yeah, I do think, no, it's a really important question. This was one of the things that drove the Mitnagdim crazy. The Mitnagdim literally means like the opponents, or the ones who are opposed. And that's what eventually those who opposed Hasidism, like the Vilna Gaon most famously, and those who kind of followed him, as I think I said last week, or last time we met, their opposition to the Baal Shem Tov was not that he was a Kabbalist, because they were all Kabbalists. It was the implications of his teachings, that it might seem that you didn't need to be like studying Torah all the time to be kind of at the highest level. And some of the famous stories, I think I mentioned this last time, some of the famous stories we've heard from the Baal Shem Tov about, there was a kid who was dancing around in the field and he didn't know the prayers or something. And so he started playing the flute, and the Baal Shem Tov said, all of you guys who are in the synagogue and you're all obsessed with like how smart you are and what good Jews you are, has like a direct access to the Baal Shem Tov. So excuse me, direct access to God. And so it does seem to imply in some cases that that's precisely right. And yeah, I mean, I do think he's trying to open that up. But again, he's assuming that he's talking to a group of people who are learning Torah, right, and that are cleaving to the path. But I think what you're saying is undeniable. That is in there. Okay. Now, hold on 1 second. Okay. Harvey, can it wait, or is it on this topic? You're on mute, bud.
It's on the topic, but
Okay.
it can wait on.
Oh, okay. So let me do one other thing, because I want to, before I forget this. So one of the things that I think is really, really powerful and interesting about this first teaching. Going back to page 4. By the way, there's a very strange thing where the last 2 sentences on page 4 through the end of the paragraph at the top of page 5 do not actually appear in the Hebrew that's in the back of the book. So I don't know what that's about. If that was an oversight or confusion of different editions, but for whatever, where it begins on bottom page 4 with the word "the meaning of," that's not actually in the Hebrew. Anyway, so this, what I'm about to say, a little bit draws on some of the things that we're talking about, because you get to a level where he is trying to draw you past the rational. So I don't think he would say rationality is bad, but he is trying to get you to go beyond the rational to the supra-rational in order to access the cleaving to God. So why do I say that? So he says, let me just find it. Okay, so do you see in the last paragraph on page 4, the third line down, it says, alternatively, this comes to teach. I'll give people a minute to find that. It's the word alternatively, third line of the last paragraph on page 4.
Maybe you should read it for the people who,
Yeah.
or somebody could read it for the people who don't have a book yet.
Yeah, Ann Paul, why don't you read it?
Alternatively, this comes to teach us that as soon as the word emerges from your mouth, do not dwell on it, but move on. Do not look at how the unification enacted by your practice rises on high, just as one ought not gaze directly at the sun. This is the meaning of finish it from the top.
So don't worry about that last part where he says, this is the meaning of finish it from the top. He's just trying to bring it back to the Torah verse from Parshat Noah, but don't worry about that. But let's just look at what he's saying. I think this can be understood on 2 levels. One level is and again, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is how he's trying to get us past the level of rationality. On one level of what he's saying is, I think, as you're reading along, as you're praying, don't stop and think about the meaning. Okay, I don't think that's actually what he's explicitly saying here. But do not allow yourself, when you're in that beautiful flow of prayer, do not allow yourself to stop and say, okay, God fashions light. What is the source of the light, or what does the light represent? Don't do that. That's one thing. And also, I think he's saying something that is even at a higher level, and for people who don't, this, I think he's addressing other people who are really grappling with some of the problems of spiritual experience and the problems of meditation. I think he's also saying, and this is really what I think the pshat of the sentence is about, the core point of the sentence is about, is when you finally lift the wind comes under your wings, and you're finally able to kind of have the sense that you're just cleaving to God, right? And you have the sense of unity. Don't stop and think about it. Don't stop and say, oh my God, I get what he's saying. Finally, I understand. I feel so close to God. If you do that, it's like staring at the sun, and it's going to screw up the whole thing. So don't dwell on it. So just allow the experience of cleaving to God to flow through you. Don't drop back into the rational and say, what's happening to me? Where, I feel like I'm dissolving, or even this is so beautiful. Don't stop to gaze, just keep going. So he wants to get you to this point, or he wants us to get to a point where we enter in through the gate of the rational, right? Or to put this in Kabbalistic terms, and if you don't get this because you haven't studied Kabbalah with me, that's fine. We enter in through Malchut. You have to enter through Malchut. You have to enter into divinity through the world of separation and rationality, if you will. But you don't want to end there. If you want to keep ascending, you need to get beyond the realm of the rational, and you're just experiencing the divine flow, or experiencing the unity of all things. But don't stop and say, wow, this is neat, or gee, things really are connected, because then it'll just stop. Okay.
Are you also saying that?
Hold on, Brad. Wait, I want to go to Harvey. Go ahead, Harvey.
Okay, when you were talking about snails and trees and everything, could that concept be put into the abstract of everything exists in the mind of God?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Everything you see, and you put it in very Kabbalistic language. That is what a Kabbalist would say. And so in some ways, remember that the Baal Shem Tov he might say, all I'm doing is putting into different language that's more accessible what the Kabbalists really meant. But yeah, it's everything that you see around you and everything you can think of, and including you, it's all within the divine oneness. There's nothing else that exists besides God and godliness in the universe that ever has been or ever will be. That's all there is. And so becoming aware of that is the hard part, and he's trying to allow that to unfold. So yes, it's all within the divine mind. Okay, Joel, did you have a hand up a while ago?
So it sounds like you don't necessarily need to know. I mean, you need to know what you don't know in order to meditate and understand this whole concept of everything, all the atoms are the same, all the words and the letters, etc. But he doesn't want you to do that, because if everybody does that, then we're just going to have a bunch of hippie Jews meditating all day, but we're not going to know.
Right.
It could be fun. Mushrooms are now legal, medicinally here. But that's kind of, if I'm understanding correctly, that's kind of the issue. And ideally then you should actually learn Torah and learn this stuff, so then you know how to meditate. But if you get somebody like, I'm not a very spiritual person, like I'm more observant and knowledgeable than my wife, but she's much more spiritual. Someone could be really in tune spiritually, and I think it was Brad who mentioned it before, and that would ease the burden of them trying to understand, like me, analytical, trying to figure out every line in the Torah, where they're like, I don't need that. Yes, you got to make sure you know the traditions, you don't lose it for future generations, but you could then grasp this whole meditation thing so much easier. I mean, is that kind of? I mean, that's how I'm summarizing it in my mind.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. But again, just to be clear, we have not read in this class. We have not read anything of the Besh that addresses this particular problem. So I don't want to misrepresent it. So we don't know exactly what the Besh would have seen if he saw, unlettered Jews, in like a trance chanting Hashem's name in Washington Park. We don't know what the Baal Shem Tov would have said about that. But I think that he would have said, and then after this I want to move on because I don't want to speculate. There's no point in speculating. We can all just guess what he would say, and others may have written about it. But I think he would say that we're studying the Torah and the prayers and keeping the mitzvot not only to keep them for further generations, for future generations. They're not just like utilitarian in terms of the broader culture, but irrelevant to the individual. I think he would say, look, ultimately the mitzvah of like separating, well, I don't want to step too far afield. I don't think he would say, listen, the specific words of the Ma'ariv Aravim or of the Yotzer, the morning prayer, or of the Shema, the words themselves are not finally irrelevant. These, I think he would see them, I'm not sure, I'm totally guessing. I think he would see them as tools that help you eventually arrive at the level of consciousness that we're saying. So ironically, it's like, if you have a ladder you have a ladder. The goal of having the ladder is to be able to get up to the roof to see the ocean, right? But that doesn't mean you can throw away the ladder. I think that's what he would say. Like, no, you need the ladder because that's the thing ultimately that will help you realize that it's not a great analogy because that would mean I would need an analogy that would say you need a ladder to help you realize that you don't need, that the ladder itself is not what you really need. So now I sound like a completely insane person. It's probably a great place to cut it off. So, for right now, I'll just say that he never would have accepted the notion that we can throw out the tradition. He felt it was essential, but as the teachings point to, it's not the tradition, it's not the words on the page in and of itself that are the final meaning. It's what they point to, the larger reality. I think that's maybe the safest thing we could say about it. Okay, so I think I think that we're going to leave that there for now. Let's go to the next one, and then we're gonna have to skip around a little bit. Otherwise, we're never going to get through the whole chapter. But let's look at is it the next one? No, sorry, I am skipping forward. I want to go to on page, was it 7? Is that what you were saying, Cheryl? Yeah, 1.17. And we're skipping the others not because they're not important and illuminating, but because we just have to make choices. Okay, so this is really wild. So because let me just give you a little background before we dive into 1.17. And for those who don't have the text, you know what I'll do? This is a little nutty. Is there anybody, raise your hand if you do not have the book. I'm not singling you out to ridicule you or get mad. Okay, so this is probably not, there's a risk of really causing confusion here. But okay, in this column, let's go like this. In this column is my translation. So until you have the book, highlighted in that yellowish color is my translation of 1.17. Okay, so if you don't have the book, you can read this. So, but as background, before we start reading that, as background, I want to explain this basic concept that you have to understand to know what he's talking about. So in the tradition, there is a division well before the Baal Shem Tov, back in the time of the Talmud. There's a division between Torah Lishma, which is usually very hard to translate, but something like Torah, studying Torah for its own sake, versus studying Torah lo lishma, not for its own sake, with the latter being not good, okay? Because what the latter means is you're studying Torah for some ulterior motive. This is how it's usually classically understood, and he's going to change the interpretation of it. Classically, it's understood as you study Torah because you want to get paid, and you need to make a quick buck. You happen to have a sharp mind, a quick buck. Like that's people who are trying to make quick money definitely start studying Torah to teach it. But anyway, you care about the income, or you care about your reputation, and you want people to think you're awesome, and so you study, you teach Torah, you study Torah so you can teach it for an ulterior motive.
Vanity.
Huh? Vanity, right. Vanity or any other aim besides just studying Torah because you're studying Torah because God told you to, right? Because that's what we do, because God created the Torah and that's what we do. That's lishma, for its own sake. And he is going to riff on what this distinction means. So he's going to read it in such a way that both studying for its own sake and studying not for its own sake are both very high levels in the way that he's reading it, as you'll see. Now, and this gets a little bit, I think, Joel, to answering the question that you raised and that others have raised. And this is why, Cheryl, I said I wanted to pause and come back to it, because I think it fits into this answer about what would the Baal Shem Tov say about people who blow off Torah study and they just want to listen to Reb Zalman of blessed memory, chanting, and that's all they want to do. What would he say to that? So, by the way, that's those who know me know that's not a diss of Reb Zalman. I consider Reb Zalman a personally very important teacher to me and one of the giants of the 20th century in Jewish life. So I hope that didn't sound snarky. But there are a lot of people who have been influenced by Reb Zalman who don't know much about Torah, but they try to cleave to God and meditate, and good for them. But this is what I think he would say to them. This little bit is directed to folks who are asking this question about what do we do with the tradition. So the first level, he says, of Torah, and also prayer would go for, this would go along with this, is considered not for its own sake, okay, in comparison with the higher level, okay? And we're going to skip over this bit about the halacha. It's very, very cool, but for right now, we're going to skip over it. And what he understands is the studying Torah not for its own sake, is you're studying it to prepare yourself, to elevate yourself, to learn how to access God. You're using it for reasons having to do with musar, that is for personal ethical improvement, for clarifying your mind, for doing all of these things that are tools that will help elevate you as a Torah learner and as a prayer. Okay, he's saying that is Torah not for its own sake. And to be clear, he thinks that it's very admirable. It's just not the final level. It's a very admirable level. So and the reason is, well, actually the reason will be more clear when we look at the higher level. Okay, the higher level is Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake, in which, how does he put it? One second. Okay, so I'll highlight this with a different color. So I've highlighted it with that brighter. So the next level is when you're studying or praying without any other goal, without even the goal of enjoyment, right? Because as an example, like there are people who pray because, well, I'm supposed to, and the rabbi is going to get mad, or I need to help so-and-so say Kaddish, right? That's admirable. But then we might think even a higher level is, I'm going to pray because I love praying. It just feels so good and it centers me. For the Baal Shem Tov, that's still not the highest level. The highest level is without any other goal or enjoyment, but just to cleave oneself to the letters of the Torah in prayer. One's inner dimension cleaving to the inner dimension of the Torah and prayer, which is the soul of the letters. So this is a little confusing, by the way, just parenthetically, because when he uses the phrase the soul of the letters, that's confusing for what we talked about earlier, when the letters are themselves the soul. You know what I'm saying? It seems like he's speaking a different language. My best explanation for that, Cheryl's saying we lost you. Can you not hear me? Cheryl, I think you've got a Wi-Fi problem. My best explanation for why, and this is just a parenthetical, and then I'll get back to the main point in a minute, for why he's using slightly different language is just because remember that everything we have from the Baal Shem Tov actually comes through his students. And so you have different students who, in the process of trying to teach the Baal Shem Tov's meaning, they change the language and they use different concepts. So I'm not banging my head against the wall trying to synchronize these two concepts. But the higher level, Torah Lishma, is when there's just pure cleaving to God, right? So think of that moment when you cleave to God through the snail, everything dissolves and there's just you and there's just God's unity. That's Torah Lishma, that's the higher level. And the purpose of the first level, the lower level, is to prepare us to be able to do that. Okay? the reason that you study Torah in order to develop the skills and to learn how to diminish our ego and to learn how to act in the proper way and to learn the proper words and all of the stuff is to prepare us for that moment when everything dissolves. Okay? And then to skip down to the very bottom of this teaching, he says, if you go to if you go to page 9, look at the top of page 9 for the ending of this teaching, where he says, yeah, whatever. I'll use his Colossus translation, but mine says more or less the same thing. Top of page 9. But as for other types of ulterior motive, that is, as for other types of Torah that is not lishma, one's transgression, if one engages in them, is too heavy to bear. So for the Baal Shem Tov, like those things aren't even, we're not even talking, like, why would you bother even talking about that? The notion that you would study Torah to earn a living, or you're studying it to become respected or ego, like that's not even on the table. That's just sin, right? So that doesn't even get, we're done. We'll stop it. Don't even talk about it anymore, okay? So that's not even in his formulation at all. Okay, now here's like a little, yes, Cliff says, is there a reason he's writing about conjugal? I imagine the next word is relations. Yes, beautiful. I'm glad you asked. So here's where we get to this awesome level of Kabbalistic understanding. So this is so funky. And I'm belaboring this teaching because I really do think this illuminates what came up in the previous conversation about the question about why do we need the tradition, right? If we could just dissolve into God through a snail that we see, why do we need all this other stuff? So whether you find his answer convincing, he does address that in his own way. Okay, so the first step, which is less important, but it's just kind of fun, in my opinion, kind of cool, is the word halakha, which means Jewish law. The letters can be rearranged to mean ha-kala. Ha-kala means the bride. Now, Kabbalistically, the bride can refer either to the Jewish people themselves, or it can refer to kind of the beginning level of God consciousness, like not the highest level where everything is unified, but the lower level where you still have distinctions, but you're contemplating God nonetheless. So halakha, Jewish law, can be rearranged to be read as hakala, the bride. Okay, now what happens is Torah study is like an adornment of the bride. So the bride, so now let's just say that for now, the kala refers to the Jewish people who are striving to come close to God. Torah study helps us, and there's kind of no way around it. This is patriarchal language, and I'm just teaching the best, and I can't present this in some way that renders it unfraught with regard to gender. So the idea is drawing on this idea from the Talmud that the bride has to be adorned, right? And I'm just on the simple level. An actual bride must adorn herself for her husband to kind of arouse the husband, so that they can make a zivug, they can make a coupling. So the Shekhinah, the Jewish people, striving for their God, they beautify themselves, they adorn themselves by studying Torah, right? So this is an Torah with an ulterior motive, because the purpose is to adorn yourself, to make yourself spiritually beautiful. It's a high level, but it's not the highest level. Why does the Kala do that? Well, just as a Kala in the ancient world would need to adorn herself in order to arouse her husband so they can come together as one, right? Physically and spiritually unify. So too did the Jewish people need to adorn themselves in order to arouse, and this is Kabbalistic language, which is fraught with sexuality, right? This is not an innovation of the Baal Shem Tov. This is classic Kabbalistic language. Arouse the masculine the Kabbalah talks about the higher levels of God in masculine terms. And once the people Israel have adorned themselves, that's they've prepared themselves spiritually through study of Torah, now there can be a cleaving. Now they can awaken and come to a higher consciousness where the divine mind and the human mind kind of become one. That is, human beings, our egos dissolve and we no longer suffer under the world of illusion when we start to see every level is unified with a higher level, and they make a coupling. So that's why there's this sexual language. And it's so if the adornment for this, if that's the lower level of Torah study, because it's for the purpose of arousing, the purpose of arriving at the point of unification, then when we actually do become unified, that is when our ego consciousness blows open and we just experience the oneness, that is actually Torah Lishma, because then God. And, husband and wife are no longer separate. They become one. They have a moment of spiritual and physical unification. So that's why the Kabbalists use that sexual language. They couldn't find another metaphor that more appropriately spoke to these two separate things unifying. So let me pause there. Questions, comments? If you don't have questions or comments, I'm going to go ahead and assume that my Wi-Fi connection is down. Yeah, Ann Paul, and then Brad.
I'm sorry to have all the questions.
No, it's good.
I don't know how to ask my question without sounding disrespectful, but what's the goal of this unification with God? Why are we cleaving to God? It sounds really impractical. Like, are we not ruined then for our everyday lives once we do that?
Oh, that's so interesting. Help me understand how would we be ruined for our everyday lives?
Well, I mean, once you're seeing the unity in everything and you're cleaving to God and you've got this magnificent connection going on, how do you go back to doing the dishes?
That's such a great question. Yeah, that's such a great
That's-
question. Lenny, do you have an answer or a separate question?
An answer. Not the answer, not an answer. What's going on with my
Let's hear the
microphone?
answer. It could be on my end.
No, it's probably on my end. I think that this was the whole question you were talking about. You have to do that inside of a framework or you're lost. I mean, if there was no framework there, that would be it. It would be like water without a urn to put it in. So I think that kind of relates back to your former question, but I just relate if anybody knows Reb Shalom Brat, who, if anybody heard him speak, somebody asked him and says, he was talking about never telling a lie. You just don't do it. Somebody said, well, you say your wife says, how do you like the brisket? Great shalom, shalom and all that. He says, nobody ever asks me anything.
Meaning what?
Meaning that he always gave the answer that he felt was not a lie. So I mean, so this just goes back to Anne saying, how would you live in the world? And if you always told the truth, it would be, that's it. Nobody would ever talk to you anymore. And that's why you need to do things through a framework.
That's interesting. I love that. I love the way you told that. Well, listen, so I think that's a great question. And I think actually, and my answer would be, and I know there are other hands up, but let me just try to address this. One answer, which I do think is something like the answer, is what makes is the profoundly Jewish response to that. To think about the moment when Hashem says to Moses after the golden calf, Hashem is like so upset, and I think we're supposed to understand that God is testing Moses. But remember that God says to Moses, forget those guys, forget those knuckleheads at the bottom of the mountain. They're never going to be at our level. I'm just going to destroy them and start over with you. And I've always thought of this as I've always thought of what this looks like is like Moses is up on Har Sinai, and Moses is just in the most magnificent, deepest, purest form of cleaving to God. He's like meditating for 40 days, and there's no Moses and there's no God. It's just total unity. And Moses is just like a vehicle for all of this divine energy passing through him. And he realizes this is what it's about. Why would I ever go down here? Why would I ever go back to the people? But then he realizes that, well, unity wouldn't be unity if it's not really unity. If I'm not going back to live in the world and to reduce suffering and to help people clear away their own illusions and to come close to God, if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing what my purpose is, which is to create unity. In other words, you can't have true unity just by praying to God. That has to be an element, but ultimately we have to live in the world. God wants us to live in the world and to create. The ultimate answer is that we're supposed to be trying to bring about the perfect unity of all beings and with God. That is, we're supposed to be working to bring about Mashiach. But if I go to shul one day and I have an amazing davening experience and I say, forget it, I'm just moving to a monastery or a Jewish monastery and I'm just going to daven all the time, I'm taking myself out of the unity. I'm not creating the unity. Brad, you had a question?
I had a comment on what Ann was saying. I think of this as attaining this level, you become vulnerable in the real world. You'll be taken advantage of in business dealings. You'll get robbed on the train, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It'll elevate you above that, and yet physically you're vulnerable. So there's that part, I guess. Now, the thing that I had to ask, I hope I can do so quickly. You begged for questions. That's the problem. You got them.
It's good. It's good.
No, but so this imagery that's used in Kabbalistic thought of human sexuality. When I go to the Sif edition transliterated Siddur, it says in the introduction that there are no words in the Hebrew language for the sexual organs or relations. And the purpose of this is, according to Rambam, that it's because it instills within its people a sense of modesty and purity. And that's why we don't have those. So what does that mean, and how do I square those two unsquareable things? And is that true? I can't imagine that there are no words.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm maybe not the right guy to ask. I don't love that kind of answer. I mean, honestly, I just don't love what that guy is saying. I mean, yeah, it's true, but is it deeply true? I don't know. The Kabbalists are pretty darn explicit. The Zohar is pretty darn sexual. It's true. There's not is there no word in ancient Hebrew or rabbinic Hebrew? The rabbis find other ways to talk about it, but yes, they always use euphemisms. Is that to create modesty in us? Maybe. I don't know. I probably shouldn't have been dismissive of it, but I find that kind of I find that a Judaism that's purely focused on cultivating certain behaviors of modesty and obedience and stuff, and I find that stuff tiresome. And I'm kind of grumpy right now, so I don't know. I'm not the person to ask, but yes, all I can tell you is that the Zohar is immensely sexual.
Yeah, I think what you just said is that what seems, and it's fine with me, it seems that what is a contradiction on its face, you go to a slightly different level, even not very much deeper, and there's really not a contradiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Okay, I'll go with that. Cheryl, and then go ahead, and then Cheryl. Sorry, go ahead. So, hold on, wait. Sorry, the person whose name appears as Para Winningham. What is your name?
Para.
Oh, Para. Okay, Para. Sorry, why don't you ask, and then Cheryl's next,
Well, I had a comment.
and then Abby, and then Abby. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I had a comment about the usage of the sexual terms to try to describe the ecstatic experience of this union. And the same terms come up in other mystical traditions, like Hildegard von Bingen, when she had her visions and her ecstatic experiences, the closest thing she could come to try to describe it in words was the same allegory of the sexual ecstasy union
Yeah.
with God.
Yeah.
And this occurs over and over again in other mystical spiritual traditions, the usage thereof to try to describe this ecstaticness
Yep.
in the union. So I just want to make that
Yeah,
comment.
thank you. Yeah. Hildegard is all over that stuff, and it's very, very powerful. And you can count, there's Renaissance Christian art. What's the ecstasy of so and so? This famous work of art where it looks like she's just in this ecstatic prayer experience, but it actually doesn't really look like that's what she's so ecstatic about. So there are definitely, this is in a lot of religious traditions have this idea. So thank you. That actually helps contextualize this. Cheryl, and then Abby. And by the way, for those who are waving their arms wildly, I can't actually see, it doesn't pop up in the chat room when somebody wants to speak. So the best way is to unmute yourselves and try to get in there, and then I can notice you. So I'm sorry, Abby, for ignoring you, but Cheryl and then Abby.
Okay. I'm going to disagree with all this worry about if you get to the high level, you'll be, sort of naked and abandoned in a dangerous world. What I want to point to is things that come from other traditions, because I don't know where this is so much in Judaism. But one saying from Buddhism, I guess, is, it's like before enlightenment, I was chopping wood and carrying water. And then after enlightenment, I was chopping wood and carrying water. It's like you don't.
Right.
What you're doing doesn't necessarily look the same, doesn't look different from the outside, but your experience of what you're doing and how it relates to God changes.
Yeah.
And then the other, I'm going to just dive into martial arts that I've done where, and Ann's husband used to do this too, I think. So Aikido is a martial art where, it sounds weird, it's a martial art for peace. Your whole point of doing it is to bring harmony to the world.
Right.
If you go and look at the school, you see, fists flying and people falling and everything, and it doesn't look peaceful. But if you kind of break it down and really get into what's going on, it's all about avoiding confrontation and kind of going around things to get to your goal.
Right.
And this, if you said, oh no, I never fight with anybody, you think, oh, this person is in great danger. But if you look at like some 70-year-old little old lady who no one can touch, that's what she was studying.
Yeah. So Cheryl, thank you for both of those things. I just want a practical matter. If you can move closer to your Wi-Fi, it's very, very hard to understand what you're saying. I did hear you, but it breaks up a lot and you're frozen. And it seems like you need to get closer to your Wi-Fi. So what I want to say about Cheryl's first point, and then I want to go to Abby, is that I do think that's right. I would say on the one hand, I want to hold out space that there is a little bit of qualitatively different levels of consciousness. Moses on Mount Sinai, or the Baal Shem Tov in the deepest depths of cleaving to God, that is not an ordinary way of moving through the world. And so I do want to hold out space for that. On the other hand, I think what Cheryl said is true. It's not like you turn off the cleave switch in your brain when you have to go, visit somebody in the hospital or go to work. Like, what you're ultimately trying to do is to draw that consciousness into moment by moment life. And one of the reasons we make a bracha before we do a mitzvah, or anything, whether you drink a glass of water or anything that requires a blessing, is to have those moments that are connecting us to the ultimate, right? We're recognizing this apple I'm eating is not just an apple that comes from food front or whatever. Like, ultimately, this apple is an expression of the unity of all things. And in making this blessing, or when I go to the bathroom and I make a blessing, I'm recognizing the connectedness, and that I'm not just this discrete being, but I'm connected, right? So even the most basic traditional Judaism contains this as well, that we are supposed to bring that awareness of unity into everything we do. Abby Layton.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I just wanted to come back to Anne's question. Also, it's a really good question. It's what most everyone asks when they start a meditation practice, because it is daunting to let go of the sense of self and unite with all being. So here's the deal: is that it doesn't make you lose yourself. You don't lose anything by doing that. In fact, what happens is this incredible dance with pure intimacy. So going back to the snail story, for instance, everything, when you're unified with holy oneness or God, everything becomes so kindred and precious and beautiful that you just genuinely come to this place of great love and compassion. There's no other thing that's going to happen. And for me, and I think most everyone I know that has this practice, you begin to exist more rather than less. Like, you become larger and you have more of a container to hold experience and other people.
Beautiful, but beautiful.
Oh, I also wanted to say that I am so relieved to be reading this. And I think that mystics in Judaism have a really bad rap as hippies and whatever. And I just love reading this and working with it.
Good, I'm glad. And I first of all, I'd like to just put in a good word for hippies. There's, let's just say, you can't insult someone by calling them a hippie. So that's for the record. But I also
hippie comment was also a thumbs up, by the way.
Okay, good. Yeah, I got that. But so Abby, to your point, I'm glad you're loving the book and it's resonating, because it is so beautiful, and it is more accessible, and I think it declutters some Kabbalistic concepts that are just genuinely difficult. And to your other point, yeah, that's beautiful. That's a way of articulating that it really is not an either or. It grows your capacity to engage in daily life in a way that speaks to the unity of things, and it allows you to embody that. So thank you for that. I want to maybe hit one or two more teachings here, somewhat randomly, but we are going to end on the last one. But right now I want to go to So this, we still, this one I really love, and it's profound and simple, but extremely deep. So I want you to turn to number 6, which is called The Consciousness of Open Awareness in the College translation on page 15, number 6. And I'll share my translation again. You can tell I thought it was important because I made it red. So I wanted to share it with people. Okay, so just this, for those who don't have the book, you can use the translation that's on my screen. I hope that's big enough. So let's see, somebody just read the version from the book out loud. Demute yourself. If somebody who's not read will just read number 6 on page 15.
Baal Shem Tov explained, a window make for the teva. Window is a word denoting light, and teva refers to speech. Meaning that when a Jew wants to speak, he needs to see that machshava, higher consciousness.
First, sorry, I thought you were reading from the book, but go ahead, that's fine. First
Shines into his speech because the letters of machshava spell kashav ma, contemplate what is.
Okay, and in the other, you can see the Callus's translation is slightly different. He takes some more liberties, but it's I think it's a good translation. He puts it into more idiomatic English. But what I think, so first of all, remember that this entire book, which is inserted into the collection of the Baal Shem Tov's comments on the Torah, it launches from this verse in the Noah story where God tells Noah, make it sohar, a window, for the teva, which means ark. But remember that teva also means word, and sohar, which is translated as window, I guess I should put here, also means radiance. And then I'll put here ark, word. Okay, actually I'll just put word because in this context he's not referring to the ark. Okay, so in other words, bring radiance. The Baal Shem Tov says what God really means is God is not just talking about making a window for a boat. God is also telling us that when you approach words of prayer, you need to allow them to radiate, or you need to bring radiance into them. Open up the windows of obfuscation over those words so they radiate divine light. Well, what does that mean? And this is where I think the Baal Shem Tov gives us such powerful tools for prayer, because there's something very practical. Well, maybe practical is not the right word. There's something you can apply here. So what he's seeing is when you want to speak words of Torah, and although I think doesn't have just in mind Torah, he's saying anytime you communicate. So this also goes to Anne's question or Anne's comment, and to what Cheryl and Abby both said. I think the Baal Shem Tov would say, no, any word you're speaking, allow them to radiate. And what that means is you have to realize that when you're speaking, your speech is a machshava. Machshava literally means thought, but in this context, machshava is like the highest divine thought, like the divine. It's an expression of the divine unity of all things. So bring to your prayer speech, but every other kind of speech as well, an awareness of like the ultimate unity of all things. And then he says, and here's the part that I find this to be a real tool that he's trying to convey to us. The letters of machshava, the letters of thought, actually spell chashav ma, which is very hard to translate, but I've translated it as contemplate what is, or contemplate being. Kallus translates it as, I gotta say my translation's better than his for this one part. He says for thought refers to open awareness. That does work. But the point is, and this is what I want to focus on. This is why I consider this to be a tool that you can use in prayer, is that in this teaching, he's talking about a consciousness that actually seems to precede your engagement with the prayer book, right? So, and in some ways, it's maybe feels like it differs from the first teaching we talked about, or it's just looking at the other end of the telescope, because now he seems to be saying bring open awareness or bring a contemplation of existence and of being to your prayers. Like before you sit down, don't get carried away and like, oh God, what page is the rabbi on? Or blah, 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 you know, okay, we're on page 6. Now it's Seder Zimra. I have to stand up. Now I have to bow. Now I have to sit down. Now I have to stand. Get out of that. And not only that, don't just obsess about the words. Bring a higher consciousness and awareness that, okay, I'm sitting down with a Siddur, and in doing that, I'm trying to connect to the unity of all things that God made. I'm trying to cleave. And I want to get my brain into a way, get my brain waves into a way of consciousness and a way of relating to the world that will allow me to see that unity. Once I'm there, once my mind is attuned to what Kabbalah calls open awareness, then I can begin to pray, because then the words will allow me to actually discover or deepen this unity. And so I just wanted to share this because I think it's such a beautiful idea. Because very often, you know, we feel like we're at this low level of consciousness, and then in order to actually have an experience of God or some higher awareness, we have to open the prayer book, and the prayer book will get us there. Among other problems, the prayer book is fraught with all kinds of theological difficulties, conceptual difficulties. It's in a foreign language that most of you don't know. And so I don't know the utility of that approach for most people. But to begin with this broader consciousness that is not dependent on the prayer book, and then to allow the prayer book to speak to the unity, I think is a very, very great tool. Does that make sense? Questions, comments on that before we go to the next, the last teaching? Okay. So now we'll go to the, now let's go to number 15, which is the last thing. And this, I think, really gets to, you know, we began talking about the sort of anti-elitism of the Baal Shem Tov. You remember I began by saying, and I said in the Facebook group, like some of this stuff is so conceptually difficult, and especially his philosophy of language, and that's really not what the Baal Shem Tov is about, so just hold on for a little bit. So it's so interesting that the first chapter of this book begins with what I consider to be one of the most philosophically tricky concepts: words, souls, and divinity. And it ends on this note, which I think is just so magnificent. And if you saw the Facebook group, you know that I believe that Kallis mistranslated this part. And when you have the true translation, it actually makes it just even more beautiful. But even with his translation, it still has its essence. So I will share my screen. Whoa, what happened? Okay, so will somebody read number 15 in the book? Not what I have on the screen, which is for those who happen to not have the book, but if you have the book, would somebody read on page 17, number 15 from the book? Anybody?
I'll do it.
Great.
Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem said that if a person reads from the Torah and beholds the luminosity of its letters, but does not sing the cantillations properly, the blessed name will not be strict about such matters, since the reading is done with great love and devotion. The situation can be compared to that of a child much beloved by his father who asks something of him. Although the child may stutter and not speak properly, the father still derives great pleasure from the child. Thus, when a person says the words of Torah with love, the blessed name loves such a one exceedingly and is not particular as to whether he or she is reading properly. This is as our sages have declared regarding the verse, and his banner upon me is love. Do not read, and his banner, and his amusement of me is love.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's a pretty straightforward teaching. And what's interesting is I think he's actually correct on the front part of the translation where he says, he talks about whether a person is singing the cantillations properly. And I translate it as one does not understand the meaning of the words. The reason for this is that in Hebrew, the word for meaning is also the word for trope. So ta'am means the Torah cantillation notes. And I went with meaning. You might not understand the meaning of the words. I think he's probably right. But either way, what works is he's saying if you don't have the technical skills, the technical knowledge that is so celebrated, of a high degree of Jewish literacy, the Baal Shem Tov is saying that does not prevent you from developing a love relationship and a connection to God. And you can imagine how for a European peasantry, or not even, I shouldn't say peasantry, because I think that's not a fair description to the world, but for so many unlettered Jews at that time, what a just depth charge of soulfulness and how redeeming this approach was, that the Baal Shem Tov was saying, I know that you'll never be able to sit in the yeshiva and study the Kabbalah, or I know that you've been banging your head against the Kabbalah for the last 10 years and you don't understand it. You can still forge the deepest connection with God. You can still have an experience in unification with God. And so what I'm belaboring here a little bit towards the end is I just think that the wordplay is so delightful. So in the Song of Songs, which he very antiquatedly refers to as canticles, nobody in the world calls it canticles anymore, at least not in the Jewish world, but Song of Songs, it says, and there's two things going on. The Baal Shem Tov is really playing with this, or the Midrash. I'm not sure if it's the Midrash or I think it's the Midrash that's playing with this. That it has this mysterious line, the Song of Songs, where it says, "Diglo alai," his banner, and the word for that is Daled Gimel Lamed, of love is over me. His banner of love is over me. And even on the Pshat level, that's a very mysterious phrase. It probably has an extremely sexual undertone, or it's. I think there's like a real sexual imagery going on here. But even if there's not, the point is in some way the speaker is saying, my lover's banner of love is over me. In other words, we love each other, or he loves me. The Midrash turns it around. So, sorry, let me say one other thing. Traditionally, it's understood as the lover whose banner is over the person. Traditionally, it's understood that is the lover is God. But the Midrash turns it around. The Midrash now has God speaking of the individual, and they take the word Daled Gimel Lamed, and they just decide to say, no, it means something that has similar letters, but is totally different. It refers to Lamed Gimel, Liglul, which means stammer or stutter. And so when God says it, now the verse says, I'm going to read my translation. Sorry, I put it I put the full translation in the of this section in the Facebook group, but I realized I didn't actually do it here. But it means something like God is saying, this person's stammering to me is love, or to me, this person's stammering is love, which I think then implies God will respond in kind. So even though you don't have the ability or the Hebrew or the Kabbalistic knowledge or the fluency or the conceptual whatever, through your effort, through your stammering, stuttering, screwing up the words, God still is awakened. That is, the potential for unity is still there. And that God, you can still connect to God. And ultimately, that is really what the Baal Shem Tov is trying to achieve. Baal Shem Tov is trying to give Jews a way to experience the unity and to connect to God in that way. So I wanted to share that very beautiful teaching, and I'll pause there for any closing questions, and then we're going to have to jump because it's 1:30. Comments, questions?
My one question is.
Oh, go ahead, Lenny.
there's more housekeeping. I clicked on the button that said join the group. Am I going to get like an email link or something so that I join the Facebook group?
Yeah, so did you not receive an email from me inviting you to the group? Apparently not.
I did, but I couldn't find it when I said
Oh,
Rabbi,
well, I think
Rose.
Jemmy put it in the chat, and I believe way up there,
So I
Jemmy.
went there and it said join the group. So I just click on that.
Yeah,
and
that
I
should
joined.
work. I think so, yeah.
Okay, good.
So if you don't show up in the group, and then I'll look for that and we'll address it after.
Thank you.
Is this working for people? Is this this approach that's working as a way to clarify the best? Okay, so listen, I mean, here's my last word to you for today is that I really want to encourage you to make sure that, yes, you have a good understanding of the Baal Shem Tov and that you should really understand this book. But if we don't draw this into our tefillah and into our lives, then the Baal Shem Tov would say, well, what are you doing? Like, why would you be studying? Like, you might as well read my book as an instruction manual to go like learn how to, I don't know, how to make toast. Like, there's no point if you're not bringing it into your spiritual life. So try to think of ways that you can draw on the beauty and the wisdom and the encouragement of the Baal Shem Tov to draw into your prayer life. Now, for some of you, you may have no idea what that would even mean. For those who have done a little bit of meditation, you have some basic tools to begin to try to get beyond the level of just of rationality and of words and discrete thoughts and try to transcend that. But try to find access points that enable you to get past tricky concepts that actually distance you from God to the kind of cleaving and unity that the Baal Shem Tov is encouraging us to do. And maybe, down the road, maybe we can, at another class, we can talk about practical tools that are part of Jewish meditation and Jewish prayer. But, for right now, that's beyond the scope of this class. But if people want to talk about that, you can reach out to me and I can try to give you some resources. Okay, thanks, everybody. Take care. See you on Facebook and in the rest of the Zoom world. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good visit.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.